First of all, I'd like to move the amendment that people before profit are putting to this motion and start by just reading the first few lines of that amendment, because I always do this because I think any debate, any conversation about climate change and climate policies has to start by recognising the very, very stark facts that are constantly being put in front of us by the United Nations, the IPCC, by COP, and we seem to just be able to, as an economy, as a society, continue on our merry way and ignore them. Recent extreme weather events are warning that climate change is accelerating, its impacts are worsening, and its consequences are increasingly disastrous for large parts of the Earth, its human population and all the life on the Earth. These extremes include record temperatures, unprecedented temperatures and anomalies at both poles, Antarctic and the Arctic, and the ongoing droughts, floods and storms affecting millions of people. Current policies based on market mechanisms, private corporations, investment decisions, carbon taxes on individual consumption are failing and will continue to fail to limit fossil fuel-related emissions. That attempts to defer action on the premise of the future technological advances are fatally flawed. That's all we ever hear, future technological advances. We don't have them yet, but we're completely dependent on having them in the future. And we have been warned against by eminent academics and scientists that we run further risk of delaying real action until catastrophic warming has become irreversible. So that's the beginning of our amendment. And there has been a pretty large, and by some standards, quite successful campaign by the Green Party, not just here but internationally and others, to say that if you're serious about tackling climate change, then you have to support carbon taxes on ordinary people's consumption. In an attempt to say that that debate is settled and to present carbon taxes and their impact as a success, as a fact, and to dismiss any alternative. When I say that this is a successful campaign, I mean that it's been successful among academics, policy advisors, most political parties in this House as well, but in working class areas, the type of area I represent, and indeed in rural Ireland, it's far from accepted or successful. So let me say we are serious about climate change and about doing the right things for it, but we oppose carbon taxes. In fact, in the Climate Action Plan of 2018, People Before Profit issued a minority report on that and went into some detail as to why we don't believe that carbon taxes on ordinary people will reduce emissions and therefore cannot be the only tool in the box of the attempt to deal with climate change. Carbon tax is based on a fallacy and a neoclassical understanding of economics. It seems to be acceptable to the fossil fuel industrialists. I mean, some of the biggest oil companies in the world think it's great. Yeah, let's have carbon tax, because it's not on them, it's on ordinary people. And it puts the most polluting firms in the world first before it puts the needs of ordinary people. And it offers the illusion of action to reduce emissions while permitting business as usual for the entire corporate sector. What it isn't doing is reducing emissions on the scale that we need and in the time that we have left to save the planet from being uninhabitable. Despite reams of academic tests suggesting or hinting otherwise, particularly in relation to where most studies have been done, like in Norway, in Canada, British Columbia to be specific, where emissions in any jurisdiction have been reduced, and there have been attempts to claim this as proof of the success of carbon taxes, there is other reasons behind it. So, for example, one of the big studies that was done on British Columbia, we find that the reduction in emissions was actually in the middle of a recession. An alternative source of energy or fuel is brought in, or the offshoring of the industry to another country, and the offsetting, which is never really accounted for when they look at these arguments for proof in other jurisdictions. But what it will do is to sow illusion that what will make the difference in this world is individuals changing their personal behaviour, and that actually pushes the responsibility away from the biggest polluters on the planet, the fossil fuel industry and plastics and related industry. So it has shifted that policy debate, and that's why we're constantly having it in here. The focus and the plans to deal with climate change are away from a systemic approach or any analysis of the underlying reasons why CO2 emissions are increasing globally. Since Kyoto, we have pumped out some 60% more CO2 into the atmosphere, and that happened not because We didn't include high enough carbon taxes on ordinary people, but because the major fossil fuel corporations continue to explore, to mine and to burn fossil fuels while amassing vast fortunes and profits. It happened because no one challenged the logic of the capitalist system and its endless drive to expand, to accumulate profits and create new markets, and because the incessant drive to expand was fuelled and driven by the fossil fuel industry. But now, as we look again into the abyss and at the latest IPCC report, the window to avert climate catastrophe across the world is closing, and again we are offered as the solution increases in carbon taxes. Tough decision, mature political policy. It's a fraud. It doesn't work. And if the Green Party and the government parties don't understand that, ordinary people instinctively do. And I've found in my life ordinary people are often way ahead of leaders and political advisers. They know it's a con, they know it's to hike up energy and fuel crisis for them, while at the same time there's no problem with planning LNGs being situated in Shannon or elsewhere. In France, the Yellow Vest movement exploded, not because they were climate deniers or because of the Russian machinations, but because they knew that this was a con to drive up fuel prices, while at the same time shutting down and reducing rail services that people needed and forcing them to work longer, forcing the retirement age up to 68. So there's always economic reasons why governments decide to pass on the responsibility to ordinary people and not look at what's happening at the top. And as I always say in here, the fish rots from the head. And if we don't look at what's happening at the top of society, then we're not going to deal with how things need to change at the bottom. And I do believe things need to change. I believe that we need to be all honest with each other, whether we drive diesel vans or are some of the biggest corporate landlords in this House. We need to be honest with each other. And in doing so, I think we need to not deny the facts of climate change, but to demand support for those of us who say we need to reduce our consumption, and therefore giving permission to more data centres or LNGs to locate off our coast is much, much more damaging to our environment, to our possibilities for the future, than to argue against the increases in carbon tax, which, by the way, reminding everybody, but everybody knows it, are coming at a point in time when the cost of living increases are absolutely crucifying ordinary people. And if the carbon taxes go up on the 1st of May, that will just embitter and embolden people who want to fight back and say, I am not taking this anymore. And I sincerely hope, and will help to advocate and plan for that, that we do see feet on the streets in response to the rising costs of living, the way we did see feet on the streets in response to the attempt to introduce water charges, or indeed to force women to live in the dark ages. These are things that ordinary people can change, but they can only do it together in big numbers. Us standing here in the House is not going to make all that much difference, except to say that we have to point out the contradiction between going after the ordinary people and allowing corporations and fossil fuel industries completely off the hook.